Hello, everyone. My name's Rick, and I'm the Rickest. I've been kind of sick recently, the last couple months actually, and I've got new audio, so I hope that I don't sound too far away. Anyway, I came back to Twitter to find this. It was just a 12-hour suspension this time. I did get a 72-hour before this, actually days before this. So I decided not to go back for a while, and wouldn't you know, I logged back in on, it was the 22nd of January to find this. And I scratched my head for a minute, but this actually was me making fun of some alt-right that were taking people's names and just assuming their race and putting them on the Daily Stormer for targeting. Obviously, that's retarded. Apparently, you're not allowed to call the alt-right retards, but you can compare them to Hitler and call them garbage people and all kinds of other things, but you're not allowed to say retards, even though that shit's retarded. So I found this. This was on Facebook. Some chicks, apparently they're saving their tamps and some pads so that they can rub it all over their faces. And I really hope this is some trolling. I really, really hope this is fake. It really doesn't look like it, though. That kind of looks like what blood would look like on your face if you took a tamp out and just gave yourself a little face mask. I do like how they say they all look 10 years younger. I can't guess that any of these women are even 30. If they are, congratulations. Keep rubbing your tamp all over your face. That chick on the left has some serious clotting issues. Look at that clot right there on her nose. It's really bothering me. So I think I'm just going to move on from that because that's a little too much. So this is another thing I found on Facebook. Actually, the rest of these examples are from Facebook. This is the classic pro-choice, pro-life debate argument here. Now, I do have to say that as soon as I looked at this, I thought this was a joke too. As you'll see, this was taken very, very seriously. If you're really pro-life, every life is precious. And if you're pro-choice, it's your choice. However, you're making that choice for a reason. Either you're getting an abortion because you want to have children later, or you don't want to have children at all. If I were pro-life, I would say that the embryos would probably be more precious because that's more life. And if I was pro-choice, I would probably say the toddler because someone's already made the choice to have that child. But as you know, there's really no clearly defined lines. So let's go through the conversation a little bit. I noticed that a lot of people had been saying pro-choice, pro-life, but this, but that. And really it's an ethical question first because she really didn't address the pro-life point down at the bottom there. So I go on to say, I do a little shit posting, I gotta admit. So I say a question of ethics says nothing about your political stance. So I say the answer is you do nothing. The person that left the kid and dozens of eggs on the train tracks is a terrorist. I think these ethical questions are ridiculous because who knows? Who knows what you would actually do in the moment? If it were actually you and you had 3 seconds to flip a switch, chances are you probably wouldn't do anything. In whatever direction the train was going, that's just what would happen. The original poster actually says this has nothing to do with politics. Because I wanted to know people's stance on a topic, it automatically means I'm making this a political post. Well, I think that it was a political post. Because literally on the meme, it says pro-lifers, blah, blah, blah. I think if that were taken off of it, it would probably have been a neutral thing. However, it was directly targeting pro-lifers, which in general are 100% Republicans. Not that that's a bad thing. I don't think that, Republicans or Democrats have to adhere to one side or the other, but the discussion is absolutely political. So I say it's, to be fair, it is a pro-choice, pro-life circumstance. And then someone else jumps in and says, doesn't mean it has to be politically related. Not all Republicans are pro-life and not all Democrats are pro-choice. So, and the not all argument is actually, I think that that's a ridiculous argument because obviously not all. Not all anything is anything. I go on to comment that it seems like the comment section thought it was political too. Almost everyone was saying pro-choice but, pro-life but. And to me, that seems like they're trying to make a point that relates to their political stance. This same person that has been going back and forth with me says literally no one but you mentioned the word political or Democrat or Republican. And at this point, I actually hadn't said Democrat or Republican. I'm not sure if I actually did this entire conversation. I was just trying to point out that doesn't have to be a political argument. I go on to say that just because the words aren't there doesn't mean it isn't political. An obviously controversial post is going to turn political. If it was a question of pure ethics, then we all answered. However, this example is used in nearly every debate about abortion. Clearly, I haven't given my political stance. I just said ethics have nothing to do with politics. I'm wondering why you would disagree. And I already knew why there was a disagreement. There was a disagreement because someone has to be wrong. Someone has to be wrong, and a little bit of bait will attract all of the progressives, or just the contrarians, or anyone that just wants the white male to be wrong. And I have to admit, I usually don't bait people this bad. This was just an unintentional shit post that turned into something. This progressive idiot goes on to say, because the abortion debate is not a political argument. Just because the majority of Republicans or Democrats align themselves in a certain way does not make it political. It's entirely a moral and ethical debate. I am literally the most liberal person. Pro-choice, vegan, environmentalist, but I do not vote along party lines. Just because I am liberal and have liberal views on abortion does not make me a Democrat. However, let me point out that being a pro-choice, vegan, environmentalist that identifies as a liberal will more or less rope you into the Democrats, because liberals are almost always left. Now, not to say that there aren't some center-right people or even some libertarians that seem like they're very liberal. And that's because it's a mishmash. It's always a conglomeration of all of your political views that determine your actual political stance. But this person has used their pro-choice vegan environmentalism to demonstrate how liberal they are, which just tells me that they're actually progressive. They go on to say that, once again, no one has mentioned politics before my post, and it was very out of place, hence the questioning of it. And I go on to say that I never claimed it did, referring to that I didn't say that this person was a Democrat, never said they were liberal. In fact, I never really said what their views were. I said what my views were. And they were telling me I was over-politicizing the topic because being pro-choice or pro-life is not a political argument. However, let's say you're a normal person and you know nothing about politics. When the abortion topic comes up in a political debate, in pretty much every presidential race you've ever seen, probably the mayor of your town has had to voice their stance on abortion. If you have to talk about it to get elected, that's pretty political. I did point out that this person had used the words pro-choice before answering, thus politicizing the topic. And I say, you can block me, but I made an obviously true statement. So I just assumed that there wouldn't even be any follow-up to it. So the original poster says, truth, I said I want to know your reasoning, no mention of political stance at all. However, the meme actually had pro-lifers, yada yada, you saw it. Anyway, so this retarded progressive goes on to say, pro-choice equals political? Meh. It means I believe women have the choice to choose the fate of their fetus, which means I would pick the fetuses, LOLLL. Now, the problem I have with just this statement alone, being pro-choice means you also respect the choice of the woman. Now, if you respect the choice of the woman, there was a child on the train tracks. Therefore, you should pick the child because someone already did. And this is where it gets ridiculous, because I say truly progressive, because that is obviously progressive logic. I feel this way, therefore it should be this, instead of what the stance actually would be if you really did believe that women have the choice to choose the fate of their fetus. That fetus was carried to term and birthed, therefore you should choose the fetus. Therefore you're defeating your own logic. And yes, it is. She asked for what you would choose. You said pro-choice, but. So my comment stands, and it did. And it did. And then this progressive goes to say, but I just want to know people's reasonings, quoting the original post, the end. Well, I kind of hoped that we would go back and forth a little bit on this. I don't want to just make people rage quit the internet. I want to have a conversation. I want to have a conversation that goes somewhere where you actually understand your views so that you can relate those to me. Maybe you'll change my mind about some things. Maybe I'll change your mind about some things. But this was pretty much the kibosh right here. I say, so your stance on abortion isn't political, but you use being a vegan to demonstrate how liberal you are. And obviously they had already said pro-choice, vegan, environmentalist. I didn't want to go back that far because they've already determined that being pro-choice isn't political. It's just hyperbolic, honestly. Pro-choice isn't political, but I'm such a vegan that I'm liberal. So I didn't say anything about my political stance. I pointed out that other people did. So just to recap, your views on abortion, political, not political. Your diet, political. You're woke as fuck. Now, I waited. I was taking screenshots. I usually take screenshots of conversations like this just in case they get deleted or someone flies off the handle. Normally, people would have something to say. They would at least call me an asshole or tell me I'm wrong. I mean, even if you just, you're wrong, period, and then don't respond, at least you could pretend like you had the upper hand at some point. So this person never responded. Obviously, this is a super woke liberal that is so environmentalist and pro-choice and vegan that they're just liberal. I thought this was funny. This was just a shitpost meme. This was another person on Facebook. I just assumed that everyone would have a laugh because it's obviously a shitpost. It's obvious that this is not going to further any political agenda. This is just like, let's point out the irony of this situation. On we go to point out the irony, and wouldn't you know it, almost immediately someone's with the dear white people. No one is asking you to apologize for your ancestors. We just want you to do a bunch of shit. And obviously, this is the whole thing. We got to dismantle the patriarchy. We got to dismantle colonialism. This goes on. This was actually over a couple days. I only want to focus on where the facts tried to come in. And I do say try, because there were a couple race realists in there. And obviously, black and white people are so different. And if you're thinking that there was a white person in there talking about black people, you are absolutely right. However, it was a progressive. This girl, and I will say it was a girl, I think that it may be in there somewhere. She goes on to presuppose all kinds of stuff. She does seem like maybe she is educated in some way, but I get the feeling that maybe she's just an unemployed, well-to-do progressive because of some of the arguments that she was making. So I just want to go over a couple bits, and this is kind of an insight into really the progressive logic, because it's really something I still don't understand. I don't understand the intersectionality. I mean, I understand the terms. I just don't understand why people want to view the world this way. So anyway, this mad lad here, he is questioning what she's saying. As you should. You should definitely engage the progressives. Even if you're not good at it, engage them. Maybe you'll get infected with progressivism. Chances are you'll just come away understanding that there really is not a lot of reasoning with some of these people. So, this mad lad says, so, are you saying that the rape of slaves led to a genetic deformity that makes current-day African-American women more likely to miscarriage? Not exactly, because what she was actually saying, and she says it, no, I'm saying that forced abortions led to African-American women being more genetically predisposed to having a miscarriage. So one privilege we have as being white women is being able to carry a baby to full term. Now, her argument for this was that because slave owners would have sex with their slaves, they didn't want to have mixed-race children, so they would give some of these women home abortions. So, of course, this mad lad says, I would need to see a source proving that. This is usually where progressives fall apart. Now, she tried to hold it together. She did cite a couple sources here, and I did have to do some digging into these sources because it seemed like too convenient that such an insane argument, how a few abortions, and I say a few because it wasn't millions, obviously. I think that you can't develop genetically like that in just a few hundred years. If that were the case, anyone in America would look like Native Americans. Or maybe if your family had a job, if your family had been farmers for 100 years, you would probably be pretty dark. However, if your family were bankers or lawyers or people that had indoor jobs, you would probably be very, very white. So since that's not the case, we haven't had any any black slaves, from 300 years ago, and now their lineage is white. That's not how race works. It takes thousands of years to develop the differences. Therefore, it would take thousands of years for a change to appear. So I had to dig into this a little bit. And Ricky Solinger did write this book. So I did a kind of a Cliff Notes search for it, and I didn't find anything like that. However, the Harvard Law Journal of Law and Gender did have a lengthy summation of it. And I did read that. More or less, this book does not have anything to do with genetics. It really covers the socioeconomic situations that minorities go through. And upon reading it more, it's not necessarily minorities. It's the lower class. It's people with less money. How you are more likely to have problems with your pregnancies if you are poor, because you can't have the top tier healthcare. Now, if you have a problem pregnancy, if you're going to have high risk anything, and you don't have a lot of money, chances are you're relying on the state. And the state, they do what they can. We don't have highly refined social health care. Therefore, you're going to have lower tier health care. Not to say that hospitals aren't different from place to place, but health care is pretty much standard across the board if you can't afford it. I did go on to read that her portrayal of reproductive rights in the United States as shaped by politics, race, class, and social forces is thought-provoking and well supported. Her underlying normative claim that reproductive politics should not be forged by economic concerns is motivated by a desire to give all women a chance to be in control of their reproductive choices. And that is more or less the core of her argument in this whole book. Has nothing to do with genetics. I looked her up. She's actually a professor of history. Therefore, it makes sense that she's writing a book that has to do with the history of, pregnancy concerning different classes, or as she put it, races. Because if you're black and you have a lot of money, I guarantee a doctor will treat you with as well as you could possibly treat it. And if you're a poor white person, you're probably on the state health care or whatever you have. It's probably not the best. Therefore, you're going to get low grade or just passable health care depending on where you actually go. I don't know why she would think that this was a comprehensive look at why she was saying abortions cause genetic deformities to make black women more prone to miscarriage. So I was hoping that the article that she linked to was going to be a lot more informative. Maybe I thought that I was missing something, so I really went through this in great detail. It's only 20 or 30 pages, including all of the references, and I was really interested in it. I was hoping that maybe this would be an insight that I'd been missing this whole time. So here we are, the Journal of Women's Health from 2002. This is actually when it was submitted for peer review. And I did look up all these people down here. What I did was actually click on their little links there. But here's the introduction to the paper. Although public health efforts have made considerable progress in promoting health equity in the United States, studies suggest that African American women are disproportionately affected by multiple sexual and reproductive health conditions compared with other women of other races and ethnicities. HIV and pregnancy-related complications remain within the top 10 leading causes of death for African American women aged 20 to 54 and 15 to 34 years respectively. Now, I don't doubt that that's true, but I can also bet there are several other races where HIV and pregnancy-related complications remain within the top 10 leading causes of death for any race, especially because pregnancy-related complications are going to be in the top 10. So I'm willing to wager that in every single race in the world, pregnancy complications that result in death are in the top 10. Now, I may be wrong for some Macronesian or some tribe somewhere that no one has found yet. It may be bug bites or something ridiculous that we have gotten rid of in the modern Western world. However, that doesn't really tell me anything. So I went on to read the whole article, and nowhere in there does it talk about genetics pertaining to the abortion claim that this progressive woman was making. So here we go. We get to the end, and here's the disclaimer. The findings and conclusions of this report are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official position of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Author disclosure statement was, no competing financial interests exist. That means, to my understanding, someone paid for this study, and then submitted it for peer review. And however, since it is not the official position of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, that means it probably did not pass peer review. Now, there's another way to figure that out, and that's if we click on the links of the authors and see what else they've published. So, as we see here, every single one of these authors, all 4 of them that worked on this paper together, history not found. That means not even this article passed peer review. They may have other articles that have not passed peer review. However, not a one has passed peer review, and that's fine. So maybe they were just off on a few things. So I decided to go through some of their research, and some of their references were ridiculous. Let's look at some of these references. Donahue E. He released this book called Black Breeding Machines, The Breeding of Negro Slaves in Diaspora. Okay. That, as you see, that was not a published medical anything. It doesn't even seem to be a state-funded or even college-level anything. This looks like it might just be maybe a history book or a novel or a biography of some kind, but it was published by Author House in Indiana in 2008. Right here, Smithers G., slave breeding, sex, violence, and memory in African history. This was published by the University Press of Florida. That is, that may be a paper, that may be a thesis that someone worked on, but as you see, also not published, not submitted. This one is a little ridiculous to me. Residential racial segregation and its impact on AIDS and HIV transmission and testing. See, I think this is where we start to get into the racism instead of class. Because residential racial segregation, does that mean you don't have every race living in one house? Maybe they're talking about neighborhoods. If you go to neighborhoods, well, neighborhoods are usually separated by property cost, not necessarily by race. Property cost is a huge thing. Not everyone can afford a huge, beautiful house. Almost everyone can afford a little shithole in the ghetto. I lived in a little shithole in the ghetto, and I wasn't the only white person. This one had to be the most ridiculous statement, though, but it was literally the closest thing to a genetic malformation, deformity, anything having to do with how your body would change due to something, racism, abuse, or anything like that. Internalized racism is associated with glucose intolerance among black Americans in the U.S. Virgin Islands. This was published in 2001, but it was published. So if you're racist against your own kind in the Virgin Islands, you're probably allergic. I have no idea how the hell that could be. I didn't even want to look this paper up. It was probably more cringeworthy than everything else I was looking at the time. Just to recap, it seems like maybe she found an argument that she wanted to put forward, so she just went ahead and said it. So when asked for proof, she probably Googled some shit and decided that this would probably be the closest thing to it. Because who wants to read a boring research paper? Who wants to read a book? Well, I didn't read the book, but I did thoroughly scour the research paper. And I figured that Harvard Law would probably be a pretty good source to go to for a summation of the book. So I think I did my due diligence there. Just to give you one more cringeworthy progressive moment, one of my friends had posted how they didn't understand how people thought illegals were getting benefits from welfare. And I said, they absolutely are. There are states that just give them stuff. There are cities, there are states that just give illegal immigrant stuff because, if they don't want to deport the person because they think that country's terrible or whatever, they just give them stuff. And now I understand them wanting to be real nice to other people. I get it. I'm not going to fault anyone for giving someone else an opportunity to live wherever. However, they are illegal, so maybe there should be different channels. So I go back and forth with this other guy, and he just did not want to hear anything that I said. So here are the last two pieces of our conversation. Once again, I did wait around to see if there was any rebuttal to this at all, because we had gone back and forth for several hours at this point. He says, "I'm not arguing the facts. I don't need to attach a works cited page to this message to know for certain that only certain cities and countries within Washington and California protect illegal immigrants. Yes, and Washington is a large part of the state, but you are still spreading misinformation, opinions over generalizations. State whatever you want. I guess it doesn't hold up." Now, I know he's wrong. I've been trying to demonstrate that he was wrong the whole time. I had given him works cited papers directly from the Center for Immigration Services. I just assumed that that was a good source because they probably have more statistics on it than other outlets. So I just left him the article to a Time article. I left him the link to a Time article because he didn't want to see anything from the government for some reason. And I say, well, since you don't want to argue facts, I'll just leave this here. And it was a Time article showing where California had just become a sanctuary state. I didn't get anything back, but it just goes to illustrate the point where progressives just want to argue. They just want to be right. They just want you to be wrong. And somehow that's going to give them even more moral superiority. So next time you see a progressive saying something that sounds like horse shit, just do a little reading. Ask them to provide a source. And, they're probably not going to be able to give you one because the identity politics, for some reason, just makes you think that white people are the most evil and we're trying to keep everything for ourselves and we don't want anything for anyone else, when in general, that's just not true. I do want to say not all, but that's not all. Not all is obvious. So thanks a lot. I'm really interested to see what else I can find on the internet, and I would like to probably turn this into maybe a little series or just some random shit posting.